Rain streaked the tall windows of Jefferson Elementary, turning the playground outside into a gray, puddled blur. Inside room 12 billion, the chatter of children stopped abruptly when the cafeteria staff's voice rang out. Amara, dark-skinned kids like you usually don't get the good lunch. The words landed like a slap. Amara, 10, with tight braids and skin that gleamed like polished mahogany, froze mid-step, her tray trembling in her hands. Around her, classmates glanced at one another, some whispering, some snickering. The privileged kids at the front tables giggled, elbowing each other, clearly amused by the staff's remark. Amara's fingers tightened around her small notebook, worn at the edges, filled with equations and scribbles no one else understood. She hadn't asked for special treatment, just a fair chance. She looked up, eyes scanning the cafeteria, searching for anyone, who might see that she wasn't like the stereotypes everyone assumed. Mrs. Calder, her third-grade math teacher, stepped forward. She placed a hand lightly on Amara's shoulder and said firmly, "Let's get you seated, right here." Her voice carried authority, and the subtle nod to the nearest aide ensured Amara's tray was filled properly. Even in the midst of whispered laughter, Mrs. Calder's intervention drew a small line of protection around her. Amara moved to her seat, chest tight but chin raised, her gaze catching the fluorescent light reflecting off the notebook's cover. A classmate muttered under his breath, "She'll never get it right anyway," and some others chuckled, but Amara didn't flinch. Instead, she whispered to herself almost defiantly, "I'll show them I can." The substitute teacher, Mr. Whitman, entered moments later. His eyes scanned the room, lingering just a beat too long on Amara. A subtle smirk flickered across his face, and the privileged student stiffened, anticipating amusement at her expense. The tension was palpable. The air seemed to thicken, as if everyone in the room knew a small, explosive moment was building. Amara opened her notebook again, tracing the margins where she had practiced problems nobody else dared attempt. The impossible math problem for the day sat on the board, rumored to take centuries to solve. Every pencil scratch, every whispered doubt from the other children, only sharpened her focus. In that moment, the cafeteria's cruel remark, the classroom whispers, and the stifling doubt all fused into a quiet fire within her. She lifted her head, gripping the notebook, ready to step into the challenge that would not just prove her talent, but defy every expectation. This moment, it will matter. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of Jefferson Elementary, cutting golden lines across the scuffed wooden floors. Dust motes floated lazily in the beams, catching on the edges of desks and lockers like tiny suspended sparks. Room 12 billion hummed with soft chatter and pencil scratches as students worked, whispered, and nudged each other. At the back of the room, Amara sat quietly, silver compass tucked in her pocket, notebook open, pencil poised. Her gaze swept the classroom, not just the math problem on the board, but the subtle hierarchies, the glances, the whispers. She noticed who spoke first, who laughed the loudest, and who seemed to assume their place was above her simply because of the color of her skin or the neatness of their shoes. She had learned early that observation was survival. Every small glance, every smirk, every whispered joke revealed patterns she could use to her advantage when the moment came. Today, the classroom was a microcosm of the world outside, and Amara intended to take careful note. A privileged boy at the front leaned back in his chair, smirk stretching across his face. "Why even bother?" he said, loud enough for the entire row to hear. "Kids like her usually don't get this right." The words hung in the air. A few students stifled laughs, others shifted uneasily, unsure where to place themselves. Even the substitute teacher, unfamiliar and impatient, glanced toward Amara, her eyebrows raised. "Maybe this problem is too advanced for you," she said. "Let's leave it for the others." Amara's jaw tightened. She didn't argue. She didn't even flinch visibly. Instead, she folded her hands over her notebook and began planning silently. Step 1, observe every reaction. Step 2, note which students doubt her. Step 3, let the work speak louder than their words. They doubt me. That's fine. I'll show them when it matters. Mrs. Calder, her mentor and quiet guardian in this battlefield of assumptions, noticed immediately. She leaned slightly toward Amara and whispered, voice low but firm, "Focus on what you know. You're ready. You can do this." A brief, reassuring hand rested on Amara's notebook, transmitting courage without a word. That small gesture, the calm certainty in Mrs. Calder's touch, was more potent than any lecture, more protective than any rules could provide. Across the room, a few students whispered to each other, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and disdain. One girl rolled her eyes and muttered just loud enough for a neighbor to hear, "She'll never get it, not her." The tension in the room was subtle but real, a tight cord pulled across every desk, every whispered exchange. Amara's notebook was more than paper and ink. It was a sanctuary of strategy and intellect. Each page contained careful notes, sketches, calculations, and observations. While other children memorized formulas, Amara dissected problems, traced patterns, and charted solutions meticulously. She also noted the classroom dynamics: who was privileged, who was overlooked, who assumed authority by proximity or social confidence. Every observation was a tool for the day she would demonstrate her ability in a way they couldn't ignore. By mid-morning, the subtle microaggressions escalated. Another privileged student leaned over her friend's shoulder and whispered so that Amara could hear. "She's probably going to mess it up again. I don't see why she even tries." The words were meant to belittle, but Amara treated them as data. She scribbled new notes, adjusted her approach, and quietly mapped out her strategy to navigate bias and expectation. Even the teacher's tone carried the faintest suggestion of dismissal. When Amara asked a clarifying question, the substitute paused, looked over her glasses, and said, "Perhaps this is too much for you right now. Let the others handle it." It was meant to undermine, to enforce hierarchy, but Amara's reaction was calm and calculated. She nodded silently, returned to her notebook, and continued working. "Let them underestimate me. I'll be ready." Lunch offered another microcosm of social and racial bias. Students clustered in groups. Some had trays brimming with food, others modest portions. Amara walked to her usual spot near the back, opening her tray. The cafeteria staff member laughed lightly, holding a tray of desserts in plain view. "Dark-skinned kids like you usually don't get the fancy options," the staffer said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Laughter erupted. A few students gasped, others whispered behind hands, some wide-eyed, some smirking. Amara froze for a heartbeat, then placed her tray down gently and opened her notebook. Her hands were steady as she began sketching patterns in the margins, mentally noting who laughed, who whispered, who looked shocked. Mrs. Calder, supervising nearby, brushed a hand lightly against Amara's shoulder, a quiet acknowledgement that she was not alone. "They'll see soon enough. I won't respond with anger, but with clarity," Amara thought. Back in the classroom, the tension continued to build. Each lesson, each question, each glance from peers and teachers layered the atmosphere with unspoken challenge. Amara's mind remained sharp, recording patterns, testing assumptions, preparing for the right moment to prove herself. She noticed which students tried to dominate discussions, who snickered at minor mistakes, and who hesitated when confronted with new ideas. Every moment of prejudice, every whispered doubt, was fuel for the strategy forming in her mind. Mrs. Calder's mentorship was never loud, never showy, but it was deliberate and protective. A glance here, a whispered encouragement there, a subtle correction of a dismissive remark. These small acts reinforced Amara's confidence. They also shifted the emotional power dynamic in the classroom. Peers who might have relied solely on privilege now noticed a counterbalance, competence backed by subtle authority and unwavering support. By mid-afternoon, Amara's inner resolve had hardened. She could anticipate comments, predict whispers, and map potential objections. Each microaggression became a step in her mental rehearsal, each skeptical glance a reminder of the stakes. The social hierarchy, the cafeteria laughter, the whispered jokes, all pointed to the challenge ahead: to overcome systemic bias, to confront assumptions, and to claim her rightful place as a thinker and problem solver. Even in quiet moments, like flipping through her notebook or tracing the edge of her pencil, she rehearsed solutions silently. Every failure she had witnessed, every small dismissal, became part of a larger strategy. She understood that proving herself wasn't just about solving a problem. It was about showing the classroom, the staff, and herself that intelligence and diligence could overcome prejudice. At the end of the day, Amara walked home slowly, notebook tucked under her arm, silver compass pressing lightly in her pocket. She reflected not only on the math problems and patterns she had worked through, but also on the subtle biases she had observed. Each glance, each smirk, each whispered remark was now data she could use. "I'll show them," she whispered to herself, voice calm but determined. "When the time comes, they won't just see the answer, they'll see who I am." And with that quiet declaration, she set the stage for what was coming. A public moment of brilliance, where skill, courage, and perseverance would confront bias directly and leave a lasting mark. The classroom microaggressions, cafeteria dismissals, and privilege-based assumptions had all become part of a carefully observed, meticulously planned journey. The tension was high, the stakes clear, and the world, though still skeptical, was about to witness the impact of Amara's quiet brilliance. The morning light spilled through the tall windows of room 12 billion, painting the classroom floor with sharp lines of gold. Amara sat at her usual spot near the back, notebook open, pencil poised. Outside, the wind rattled the old playground swings, a dull accompaniment to the soft murmurs of children preparing for the day's challenge. Today, the class faced a problem that had been whispered about for months. A math equation labeled impossible, one that older students, substitute teachers, and even visiting staff claimed would take centuries to solve. It was a challenge that had become a rite of demonstration, who was smart enough, and who would fail spectacularly. Amara's heart beat steadily, her fingers tracing the numbers she had already practiced in secret. She remembered the cafeteria incident from yesterday, the sneers, the laugh from a privileged boy, the dismissive comment about her skin. The sting remained, but the memory had hardened into resolve rather than despair. Today she would act, not out of revenge, but out of necessity, to prove that skill, preparation, and courage were not bound by skin color or status. Mr. Whitman stood at the front, chalk in hand, eyes narrowing as he scanned the students. His reputation for subtle favoritism preceded him, and today it was palpable. Privileged students at the front whispered, nudging one another, waiting to see a funny failure. Amara noticed their smirks, but she did not flinch. "Class," Mr. Whitman said, voice smooth, deliberate, "today's problem is advanced. Only those with real aptitude will make any progress. You others," he let the words hang, an unspoken suggestion that Amara, by her position in the back and her skin color, might be one of the others. Several students laughed softly. The room settled into tense silence as he wrote the problem on the board, a labyrinth of numbers, variables, and sequences that had already defeated older students. Amara's notebook shook slightly as she copied the problem. She glanced at Mrs. Calder, who had positioned herself at the side of the room, quietly observing, a faint nod of encouragement ready. She did not intervene unless needed, trusting Amara to take the lead, but the teacher's presence was a lifeline of validation, a subtle message that Amara's talent was real. The room grew still as children began scribbling. Some groaned, some whispered to their neighbors, "This is impossible, why even try?" Amara noticed the shift in body language when a few boys at the front started making jokes, mimicking failure exaggeratedly. "Oh look, maybe the dark-skinned girl can't do it either," one called, loud enough for others to hear. A ripple of laughter spread. Amara's chest tightened, but she focused. She set her pencil to the page, tracing numbers, checking sequences, recalling the formulas she had memorized and adapted. She worked with quiet intensity, lips moving slightly, eyes narrowing in concentration. Every whisper, every pointed laugh, every smirk around her became background noise, sharpening her focus. At one point, Mr. Whitman paused mid-sentence to glance over. His eyes lingered on Amara, skepticism evident. "Are you even following, Amara?" he asked, a subtle sneer in his tone. The room seemed to hold its breath. Some students chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or wait. Amara looked up calm, voice steady though soft. "I'm following. I see the solution." Her words carried no arrogance, only certainty. Murmurs spread. The teacher's eyebrows shot up, and some students exchanged incredulous glances. Minutes passed. The room was filled with the scratching of pencils, the low hum of concentration, the occasional gasp or whisper. Amara's hand moved steadily, guided by logic she had honed in secret. Equations that had once seemed indecipherable unfolded on her page. Her mind raced in rhythm with her pencil, moving faster than the room realized. Then came the moment that would define the day. Amara's pencil stopped mid-page. Her eyes lifted to the board. She had arrived at the solution, not approximate, not partial, but exact. The answer, verified against her notebook's calculations, was correct. A privileged student at the front leaned back, whispering, "There's no way," and several others turned to glance at Amara's desk. Mr. Whitman's chalk paused midair. The entire classroom seemed to freeze. Then Amara stood slowly, notebook in hand, and walked toward the board. Each step echoed softly against the floor, amplified by the tension in the room. "May I show the solution?" she asked, voice clear but modest. A few students laughed nervously. Some looked at Mr. Whitman, seeking validation. His face betrayed surprise, a hesitation that was almost imperceptible. Finally, he said, "Yes, go ahead." Amara approached the board, opening her notebook. Her pencil traced the calculations she had already committed to memory. Step by step, she replicated the sequence, explaining her reasoning as she went. The room fell silent, save for the scratching of her chalk and the occasional whispered calculation from a bold student trying to keep up. By the time she reached the final number, a palpable shift occurred. Some students stared, mouths slightly open. Mr. Whitman's eyes widened, the whispers stopped, the smirks vanished. Even the boys who had jeered at her before sat frozen, their previous laughter now replaced by disbelief. Mrs. Calder's subtle smile appeared at the side of the room, a single hand resting lightly on the edge of her desk. She knew the significance of what had just occurred, not just the solution itself, but the way Amara had carried herself, calm, precise, and entirely unshaken by the biases around her. Her quiet validation was enough to anchor Amara as the whispers of shock filled the room. Someone in the back, unable to contain their amazement, muttered, She actually did it." It was the first audible acknowledgement from the students who had doubted her. Others leaned closer to see the chalkboard. The impossible problem was solved. Every number, every sequence, every step was correct. The incident, however, did not stop with amazement. Mr. Whitman, still trying to regain composure, hesitated before writing correct on the board. Then he said, a hint of reluctant respect in his voice, "Well, that's impressive." A privileged student whispered, barely audibly, "I didn't think she could do it, I mean she's." Their voice trailed off, awkward, as they realized the social expectation they had assumed was false. Several others avoided eye contact, suddenly aware of their misjudgment. Amara closed her notebook, her hands steady. She took a breath, the room still heavy with tension. The moral weight of the moment was tangible. The laughter and derision had ceased. The room's hierarchy had shifted quietly but unmistakably. Racism, subtle and systemic, had been confronted through evidence, calmness, and undeniable talent. Outside the classroom, a passing student had filmed the entire process on a phone. Within minutes, whispers turned into murmurs of astonishment spreading through the hallways. By lunch, several students had viewed clips on their devices. The tension in the building was replaced by a buzz, some students curious, some envious, some quietly apologetic. Yet Amara's focus remained on the work, not the recognition. She returned to her desk, pen poised for the next challenge, notebook ready, the silver compass resting in her pocket as a reminder of direction and purpose. Mrs. Calder quietly adjusted her position to remain visible, a silent shield against lingering doubts or subtle criticisms. By the end of the period, the viral moment had taken hold. Students who had whispered racist assumptions now stared, some embarrassed, some incredulous. Teachers who had doubted her watched with a mixture of disbelief and reluctant respect. The cafeteria staff, aware of what had occurred, exchanged glances. Even casual microaggressions in the hallways that day carried a different weight. The impossible problem had been solved by a girl they had assumed incapable, based solely on the color of her skin. Amara's triumph was not loud or ostentatious. There was no shouting, no celebration beyond a quiet nod from Mrs. Calder. The impact, however, rippled through every corner of her world. Bias, both overt and subtle, had been challenged. Evidence had spoken where words had failed. And Amara, composed and serene, had become a symbol that no amount of prejudice could diminish inherent talent or moral courage. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of class, Amara packed her notebook and pencil with calm precision. She glanced at the board one last time, tracing the sequence she had written, and then looked toward Mrs. Calder. The teacher's eyes met hers, conveying the understanding. This was more than a solved problem. It was a moment that would resonate far beyond the walls of Jefferson Elementary. Every glance, every laugh, every whisper, it all led here. The bell had rung hours ago, but the echoes of Room 12 Billion's impossible problem still reverberated through Jefferson Elementary. Word spread faster than Amara could have imagined. By the time she stepped into the hall, her backpack snug against her shoulders, whispers had already begun. Some were curious, some incredulous, some envious. Yet beneath the excitement, a quiet undercurrent of judgment lingered, the way it always did for her. "I saw it, she actually solved it," a boy murmured as he passed by, trying not to meet her eyes. A few feet away, a girl who had teased her last week looked down at the floor, cheeks flushed, muttering, "I didn't think she could." The statement hung unfinished, heavy with shame and disbelief. Amara kept walking, silent, letting her eyes drift to the worn linoleum, the scuffed lockers, the scattered papers on the floor. She didn't need to respond. Her work had spoken for her. But even as recognition crept in, she knew that not everyone would let go of their assumptions so easily. Outside the classroom, a small crowd had gathered around a phone. A student had recorded the chalkboard sequence as she worked, capturing her meticulous steps, her calm explanations, her quiet defiance of expectation. The clip had already begun its journey through social media, whispers turning into shares, shares turning into conversations. Soon, not just students but teachers, parents, and even local journalists were talking about the girl who had solved the problem deemed impossible. Yet the recognition brought tension as well as awe. Mr. Whitman, still unsettled by the event, spoke privately with the principal, attempting to frame the moment as luck rather than skill. "It's unusual, certainly," he said, "but the circumstances were favorable. Perhaps she got lucky." Some teachers murmured in agreement, subtly undermining Amara's achievement. The whispers of bias persisted, couched in careful language that avoided direct confrontation. But even these attempts at dismissal only highlighted the systemic nature of the prejudice she faced. The assumptions, the subtle disbelief, the need to rationalize her success, all were reminders that the fight against discrimination extended far beyond a single classroom. Amara returned home that afternoon, walking through the streets lined with familiar buildings, the golden light of late afternoon warming her path. Her mother was waiting at the doorway, eyes widening as she noticed her daughter's backpack. "How did it go?" she asked, voice gentle but carrying a tremor of worry. Amara shrugged lightly, not meeting her mother's eyes at first. I solved it, she said quietly. The words felt small, even though they were monumental. Her mother's lips curved into a tentative smile. You did what? You solved it. Yes, Amara replied, lifting her chin. All of it, every step. Her mother pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her longer than usual. I'm so proud of you, she whispered. But are you okay? Did anyone, try to? Amara shook her head. I'm fine. Mrs. Calder was there. The mention of her mentor's name seemed to settle some of her mother's worry. Mrs. Calder had been a silent shield in the classroom, validating her work, providing a subtle barrier against judgment, and the thought of that protection allowed Amara to exhale fully. That evening, the phone in Amara's hand buzzed with notifications. Messages from friends, classmates, and strangers alike poured in. Most were supportive, praising her brilliance, sharing clips of her solving the problem. But amidst the encouragement were subtle reminders that the world still measured her by her skin, not her ability. Comments like, I didn't expect a dark-skinned kid to do that, or wow, she surprised everyone carried backhanded implications. Recognition, it seemed, came wrapped in disbelief. At school the next day, the tension escalated. Some students sought validation through mockery, trying to diminish her triumph by pointing out minor errors that didn't exist, whispering jokes that had layers of racial bias hidden in them. Yet Amara had learned how to navigate these moments. She kept her gaze steady, her notebook close, her pencil ready for the next problem. The murmurs could not shake her focus. Mrs. Calder noticed the microaggressions and intervened subtly. During lunch, she spoke quietly to the cafeteria staff, ensuring Amara had a proper seat, away from whispered jabs and judgmental glances. She provided small lessons in how to respond, how to stay composed without allowing the bias to take root in anger or fear. The teacher never overtly drew attention to the incidents, but guided Amara's resilience like a gentle hand on her shoulder. At the same time, the viral clip of Amara solving the problem began attracting attention beyond the school walls. Local news outlets requested interviews. Parents shared videos on community groups. The school received emails praising her talent, but also questioning the fairness of attention given to a student who had been, until recently, dismissed by authority figures. The paradox was clear. Systemic bias had created doubt, yet now her brilliance could not be ignored. Amara faced a complicated mixture of feelings, pride and excitement interlaced with fatigue and lingering awareness of prejudice. She could not pretend the world had changed overnight. She had stepped into a spotlight, but that spotlight illuminated not only her achievements, but also the ongoing skepticism she would face. One afternoon, Mrs. Calder pulled her aside after class. The room was empty save for a few stray papers and the faint scent of chalk. Amara, she said softly, I know this feels overwhelming. People will celebrate you, doubt you, and sometimes do both at the same time. That's the world, and you've already learned how to navigate it. Amara nodded, pencil tapping lightly against her notebook. It's tiring, she admitted, her voice low, almost vulnerable. I just want to do the work. I don't want to fight every glance or every whisper. Mrs. Calder smiled, understanding. You don't have to fight them all. You just need to keep showing up. Your work, your integrity, your brilliance, they're louder than their doubts. And remember, I'll always be here. She placed a hand lightly on Amara's shoulder, a gesture that was small but monumental. Even with support, the social fallout was relentless. Hallway conversations shifted when Amara passed by, whispers carrying assumptions, some apologetic, some incredulous. Class projects now included curious glances, some students attempting collaboration more out of expectation than genuine respect. But these microaggressions, once sharp and confusing, now passed with less sting. Amara had learned how to absorb without internalizing, to acknowledge without reacting with anger, to maintain focus without letting bias dictate her self-worth. At home, her mother noticed the weight of constant scrutiny. People are watching you, she said one evening, placing a hand on Amara's small shoulder. Not everyone will be fair, but you've done something remarkable, and that matters more than their opinions. Amara opened her notebook, running her fingers over the pages she had filled. The silver compass in her pocket pressed lightly against her leg, a reminder of direction and purpose. She traced numbers, equations, and solutions, each one a quiet act of defiance against doubt, against bias, against expectation. Her world was not free of injustice, but in these small acts she could assert control, demonstrate skill, and affirm her worth. The incident had also affected her peers in ways subtle but profound. Some students who had previously laughed now approached her quietly, offering tentative acknowledgement. Others avoided eye contact, their prior assumptions challenged but unspoken. The social ecosystem had shifted slightly, just enough to signal that talent and courage could disrupt the normalized bias that had governed the classroom. Even as recognition spread, there were moments of tension. Some students whispered derogatory comments under their breath, coded in ways that relied on assumptions about race and ability. Amara noticed these glances, but refused to respond with hostility. Instead, she continued her work, allowing her calm focus to speak louder than any words. Meanwhile, Mrs. Calder continued to provide guidance. She offered strategies for dealing with prejudice, subtle interventions when microaggressions appeared, and quiet validation when Amara's efforts went unnoticed or undermined. These interventions reinforced Amara's sense of resilience, helping her understand that moral courage often involved maintaining composure in the face of systemic bias, not just confronting it overtly. By the end of the week, the fallout had taken on a life of its own. Local news stories highlighted the remarkable achievement. Clips from the classroom spread online, generating discussions about intelligence, opportunity, and the subtle barriers that marginalized students often face. Some comments were supportive, others carried skepticism or disbelief, veiled through polite language. The pattern was unmistakable. Recognition came with scrutiny, and scrutiny was often colored by prejudice. Amara learned to navigate this duality. She continued to excel quietly, letting her work speak, while carefully managing interactions with peers, teachers, and strangers who questioned her abilities. Each success became both a personal victory and a subtle statement against systemic bias, reinforcing that excellence was not bound by skin color, background, or social expectation. One afternoon, she paused by the playground, watching the swings sway in the late sunlight. A small group of younger students gathered nearby, whispering among themselves. One asked, "Do you think she really did it?" "Yes," another said quietly. "I saw it on video." Amara's lips curved into a faint smile, almost invisible to those around her. She felt the weight of eyes, the undercurrent of expectation, the ripple of acknowledgement. Every glance, every whisper, every hesitant nod carried significance. These small acknowledgments, while not the victory she had imagined, were milestones on a path shaped by persistence, courage, and integrity. That evening, Mrs. Calder returned to her classroom after hours. The room was quiet, only the hum of the heater breaking the stillness. She walked to Amara's desk, now empty, and gently placed a folded note where the notebook had rested. In neat handwriting, she wrote, "Your brilliance cannot be contained by doubt. Keep shining always." Amara found the note the next morning, slipped it into her pocket alongside the silver compass. It was a small gesture, yet monumental. It reminded her that even in a world rife with bias and skepticism, there were allies, guidance, and quiet support that could sustain her through every challenge. This moment, it will echo further than anyone imagines. The week following the viral classroom moment had settled into a fragile rhythm. Jefferson Elementary buzzed with whispers, half in admiration and half in doubt, yet none could deny that something extraordinary had occurred in room 12 billion. Amara walked the hallways with measured steps, her silver compass tucked in her pocket, notebook under her arm. Each glance from peers, each tentative whisper, was a reminder that her world was both watching and testing her. It was on a crisp Thursday morning that the revelation began. The principal's office, usually a quiet and administrative space, was now buzzing with anticipation. A woman arrived, tall, poised, carrying herself with an air of authority and respect, her presence commanding attention without needing to raise her voice. Her name was Evelyn Carter, CEO of a renowned educational nonprofit organization dedicated to identifying and nurturing gifted children. She had heard of the impossible problem girl through local news clips and social media, and her curiosity had drawn her to Jefferson Elementary. Amara sat quietly in the back of the library, the smell of old books mixing with the faint aroma of the cafeteria that lingered from the morning. Her notebook rested on the table, filled with sketches of equations and patterns, the margins dense with calculations. Mrs. Calder stood nearby, her expression calm but expectant. She had briefed Amara gently about the meeting, emphasizing composure, confidence, and the importance of letting evidence speak for itself. Evelyn Carter approached with a warm, attentive smile. She scanned the notebook, flipping through pages with careful fingers. Numbers and formulas leapt from the pages, patterns unfolding in ways that only a trained eye could fully appreciate. Yet her gaze did not remain on the paper alone. She looked at Amara, observing the child who had created these solutions, assessing courage, composure, and brilliance. "This is extraordinary," Evelyn said softly, almost reverently. "You solved this entirely on your own." Amara nodded, her small voice steady. "Yes, I practiced. I studied the problem quietly before class." The CEO's eyes lingered on her, and for the first time, Amara felt the full weight of acknowledgement without doubt or dismissal. Here was a person who saw her talent clearly, without bias, without hesitation. Evelyn turned to Mrs. Calder. "Her mentor, I presume?" she asked. "Yes," Mrs. Calder replied, smiling faintly. "She's brilliant, disciplined, and determined. She's been preparing for this quietly for months. Evelyn's attention returned to Amara. We want to ensure that this doesn't remain hidden. Many children like her face systemic barriers, subtle assumptions, whispered doubts, and sometimes overt bias. This achievement, it needs to be recognized, not just for her sake, but as a signal to the world that brilliance knows no color, no background, no assumptions. Amara felt a small swell of pride. She had always understood her talent in quiet solitude. She had measured herself against problems, equations, and the occasional sneer from classmates or staff. Yet hearing these words, hearing someone of such authority validate not only her skill, but the injustice she had faced, carried a weight she hadn't anticipated. Evelyn asked to see a demonstration. Amara, hands steady, walked to the table, placing the notebook open. Step by step, she walked Evelyn through her reasoning, explaining her approach, the sequences she had followed, and the logical patterns that had led to the solution. Evelyn listened intently, eyes bright, occasionally jotting notes in her own pad. "You're methodical," Evelyn said, finally closing her notebook, "and your composure remarkable." Many adults would falter under this kind of scrutiny. Amara shifted slightly, the tension and adrenaline of the previous week's scrutiny now mingling with cautious pride. I just wanted to finish it correctly. I wanted to show I could," she said softly. Evelyn leaned back, a satisfied smile breaking across her face. "And you have, brilliantly. This isn't just a problem solved. This is a statement. A message to anyone who doubts intelligence based on appearance, background, or assumptions." News of Evelyn's visit spread quickly. By the next day, the story of Amara's achievement had grown beyond Jefferson Elementary. Local media, drawn by the clip and the CEO's validation, began running features. Articles highlighted not only the brilliance of the solution, but the broader societal implications. The subtle, systemic racism Amara had faced, the whispered doubts, the assumptions that had been challenged by undeniable evidence. Interviews followed. Amara spoke carefully, her voice soft yet clear, describing the work she had done, the preparation she had undertaken, and the moments of doubt she had quietly overcome. Questions inevitably touched on the prejudice she had faced, and Amara answered honestly, never with bitterness, always with clarity. "They didn't think I could do it because of how I look," she said simply. "I wanted to prove that talent isn't defined by color or background. I just wanted to solve the problem." Mrs. Calder, watching from the sidelines, felt a deep sense of pride. Her mentorship, subtle yet consistent, had given Amara the confidence to navigate both the classroom and this broader stage. Evelyn Carter, now clearly impressed, suggested opportunities for advanced programs, scholarships, and public recognition, but she emphasized discretion and the importance of preserving Amara's calm approach to challenges. The public reaction was immediate and complex. Social media buzzed with admiration, clips of the chalkboard, explanations of her solutions, and commentary on the systemic bias she had overcome. Comments ranged from awe to disbelief, but the underlying message was unmistakable. Amara's achievement could not be ignored, trivialized, or dismissed. Even within her community, responses shifted. Some classmates who had mocked her now approached with quiet respect. Teachers who had questioned her ability adjusted their behavior, consciously or unconsciously, acknowledging her brilliance without fanfare. Those who had maintained bias now faced the unassailable evidence of her skill. Amara herself processed the recognition with measured humility. She understood that this was not about triumph for ego. It was about evidence, clarity, and quiet moral courage. Each acknowledgement reinforced the principle she had internalized over months. Integrity and skill could overcome prejudice when coupled with perseverance. Evelyn Carter, impressed by the clarity and poise with which Amara handled public attention, arranged a meeting with local educators. She advocated for programs that could identify similar hidden talent, particularly among students who faced systemic barriers. Amara's achievement became a case study, not just in mathematics, but in social impact, mentoring, and the confrontation of subtle and overt bias. During one particularly reflective afternoon, Amara sat with Mrs. Calder in the now quiet classroom. Light filtered through the windows, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. "I didn't expect any of this," Amara said, tracing a line across her notebook. "I just wanted to solve it." Mrs. Calder smiled. "Sometimes, doing the right thing, pursuing excellence quietly, is enough to change the world around you. People may notice slowly or suddenly, but the impact, it spreads." Amara leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. She thought of the cafeteria, the whispers, the subtle biases. She thought of the fear she had felt walking to the board, the hesitation she had overcome, the composure she had maintained. And now, this moment, recognized by a figure of authority, validated publicly, felt surreal. Yet beneath the awe, she felt the calm certainty that she had done what she needed to do. She had demonstrated truth and ability in a world too quick to doubt. Later that evening, Evelyn Carter sent a personal note to Amara. Your talent is exceptional, but your courage is what truly sets you apart. Never let anyone define you by assumptions. They are fleeting, but your brilliance is lasting. Amara read the words slowly, fingers resting lightly on the silver compass in her pocket. She felt the weight of acknowledgement, the depth of validation, and the quiet satisfaction of moral courage affirmed by evidence and authority. This was more than recognition. It was justice in action, subtle yet profound, a signal that systemic bias could be confronted and challenged. The ripple effects continued. Local schools began reviewing approaches to gifted education, particularly among students historically underestimated due to background or appearance. Parents, educators, and policymakers engaged in discussions that had been dormant, and Amara's calm, articulate voice became a quiet but compelling anchor for these conversations. Throughout it all, Mrs. Calder remained by her side, a constant reminder that mentorship, validation, and subtle guidance were often the invisible forces behind visible achievement. Amara's success was her own, but it had been nurtured and protected by a mentor who recognized both brilliance and vulnerability. In the months following, Amara returned to her studies with renewed focus. The world had taken notice, but she approached each problem as before, methodically, thoughtfully, without ego. She understood that recognition was temporary, but mastery, integrity, and courage were enduring. Each equation, each problem, each challenge became an opportunity not just to excel, but to reaffirm that talent could not be bound by bias, and that perseverance could create ripples far beyond the classroom. And though the media attention, the accolades, and the public admiration swirled around her, Amara remained grounded. She continued to carry the silver compass in her pocket, a symbol of direction and purpose. She remembered the cafeteria whispers, the jeers of privileged classmates, the subtle smirks of doubters, and she understood that her triumph had never been merely about solving an impossible problem. It had been about confronting a world that underestimated her, proving that resilience, skill, and moral courage could illuminate even the darkest corners of assumption and prejudice. Every whisper, every glance, every doubt, it all led to this.